Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with Dave's Faves. And today I'm going to talk to you about a little set, actually. How many discs is it? I think 4 or so. Let me see. What is it? Yes, 4 discs of Ligety, Georgi Ligety. Now, I haven't done a lot of talking about Ligety because he sort of comes in these clumps now. You know, there was a time when there were these editions that were really quite splendid, of individual discs, and then they all got boxed up, and now most of Ligety seems to live in a box of some sort. I mean, I'm sure there are some single CDs of things like the Etudes and some other stuff, which we may also talk about. But I wanted to sort of find the ideal box or group. I've got a bunch of them here. There was this one on Deutsche Grammophon, and then there's the Ligety Project. This was on Teldec, which is now Warner. This is 5 discs, and they all have basically the same stuff. I mean, Ligety was not a hugely prolific artist. He was an enormously original and important and fascinating artist. He was one of those avant-gardists who managed to be both avant and somehow alluring. That is, I'm not sure people ran out and said, "Oh boy, let's put on some Ligety tonight, dear," when they got home from work. But for music lovers, he was an extraordinary voice, a unique and original voice, and somebody whose style was enormously compelling, even if it was sometimes difficult. His music was used by Kubrick in 2001 Space Odyssey, especially the work Lux Aeterna for choir. And that's what made him, incredibly popular, which was unusual for an avant-gardist. But of course, what a perfect choice Lux Aeterna was. Oh my goodness! It was based on what Ligety called micropolyphony, which is, a fancy word for saying texture and cluster noises that use lots of notes all at once, but in tiny little variations, and it's just fascinating. Who cares what it is? I mean, seriously, you just want to listen to it, right? So this Deutsche Grammophon box is called Clear or Cloudy, Complete Recordings on Deutsche Grammophon. And let's just see what's in it. And from that point on, I'm just going to turn you loose because you're going to want to hear it. You should have it. You should get to know it and take your time with it. Each piece is kind of a universe unto itself with this guy. And so, you take them one at a time. And his style was constantly evolving, and it adhered to no specific formula. He was not a 12-tone serialist specifically for any length of time. He was also not a neo-romantic, but he had elements of all of that stuff. He wrote, pieces called things like Hungarian rock, and he wrote pieces that were as, sort of what you might call elevated and difficult as anybody ever did. So, there's a world of music to discover with this guy. And let's see what we have here. Let's see, compact disc number 1. You get, the Sonata for Solo Cello with Matt Heimovitz, 6 bagatelles for wind quintet, and the string quartet number 1, which is just marvelous. It's called Metamorphoses Nocturnes, Nocturnal Metamorphoses, which is extremely evocative and fascinating. And then 10 pieces for wind quintet and string quartet number 2. I mean, these quartets are really quite marvelous works. And the wind quintets are actually fun too. They really are. There is a kind of a history of avant-garde music for wind quintet. Schoenberg wrote a wind quintet, which was one of the most horrifying things he ever conceived of. And Ligety's is kind of along those lines. Well, avant-garde wind music is sort of uniquely difficult, I think, but, others may disagree. It doesn't matter. Compact disc 2, oh yes, Atmospheres for Large Orchestra. This is one of those big tone cluster texture things that you just let drift by as you listen to it. It's just marvelous. And then Volumina. Volumina is for organ. It's like long. It's 17 minutes long, which is long for Ligeti. Or Ligety. I used to call him Ligeti. It rhymed with spaghetti. But then people yelled at me and said, "No, it's Ligety." So it's All right, Ligety, whatever you want to say. Maybe he just didn't want it to rhyme with spaghetti, but I was right all along. Anyway, Volumina is terrifying. I mean, it starts with, taking an organ and playing every note on it simultaneously, basically, or every note in one, rank of it simultaneously. It's really kind of like, Children of the Damned, that kind of stuff. Then Lux Aeterna, the famous a cappella choral piece from 2001 Space Odyssey. And there's organ study number 1 called Harmonies, and Lontano for large orchestra, Distance, Things in the Distance. His orchestral music, is these pieces, these cluster things that he wrote, it's exceptionally evocative. Each one is different, but they're recognizably the work of the same composer, and they are also of the same school of thought from the style of that composer. So if you like one, you're going to like the batch. Even Volumina, which is also one of those texture pieces, even though organ texture pieces tend to, get people to run screaming from the room. Apparently the premiere was so horrifying that it was canceled. And so, it was done like on the radio rather than live performance or something. I mean, Ligety could shock people, but I think in a good way, actually. And then there's Ramifications for string orchestra or 12 solo strings, and Melodian tunes. Well, they're not really tunes. They're tune-like. They're tune-like shapes. He was, his music is kind of like a sculpture. It's an object, and you can sort of see it from different angles and ends as it slowly turns in space. Melodian is kind of like that. And then we get Aventure for 3 singers and 7 instrumentalists, and Nouvelle Aventure, Adventures, for 3 singers and 7 instrumentalists. Then his Cello Concerto, which is a piece that's gotten quite a bit of play. It's only like, oh my goodness, it's only like 15 minutes long. He did not write long. He understood, as Webern did actually, that if you're going to be this dense, because his music is extremely dense in terms of its sequence of events and its harmonies and its textures, you don't have to be extended. He makes his points in a very precise and pithy kind of way. And then his Chamber Concerto for 13 instrumentalists, which is, an obvious homage to the Berg Chamber Concerto, which is quite similar, although this one, it doesn't sound anything like Berg. It's with the Ensemble Intercontemporain and Pierre Boulez. And Mysteries of the Macabre. This is a piece for trumpet and piano based on his opera, Le Grand Macabre, which is really quite a fascinating piece. That's his biggest work, obviously. It's an opera, and we don't hear it that often. The Double Concerto for flute and oboe. They were talking about a piece that's kind of normal quasi, because you've got real solos and a real sort of give and take between the orchestra and the soloists. And then Compact Disc 4, which has a solo trumpet piece called, it's only 37 seconds long, called The Big Turtle Fanfare from the South China Sea. Yeah, well, see what I mean? At least his titles have interesting connotations, possibly. And then there's 3 pieces for 2 pianos and, etudes, for the piano etudes from book 1. You only get etudes 2 and 4. Now, Ligety's etudes we have to do a separate talk about, because they are one of the most important and fascinating works in all of pianodom. They really are. They are the modern etudes par excellence. And here you get 2 of them played by Gianluca Gascoli. All these performances are marvelous. Ligety was very lucky in his performers, and people don't play it unless they know how. This is not music you fool with. You either know it and do it, or you don't waste anyone's time. So you can be perfectly confident, even though I don't mention every performer, that these are really first-rate performances. And then the Piano Concerto with Pierre-Laurent Aimard. This is 23 minutes. That's one of his, I think it's his largest concerto, and an absolutely splendid piece to sink your teeth into. And finally, his Violin Concerto. This is with Sashko Gavrilov with Boulez again. And this is half an hour long. It's a big piece, an extraordinary piece in 5 sections. So, that's it. That's clear or cloudy. I'm not sure why it's called clear or cloudy. There must be some reference to that in the booklet that I never bothered to read, but it doesn't make any difference. It's the music that matters. It's an absolutely first-class set. And, you can get this set. Like I said, you can get Teldec. There was a Sony box, which doesn't exist anymore. Maybe it will come back. Maybe it won't. Who knows? The important thing is that you listen to some of this music. It was a landmark in the history of 20th century music, a landmark in avant-garde music, and it proves, as usual, that there is no such thing as sort of like, there's only good or bad music. And everybody agreed, even in that crazy group of people in Darmstadt, that Ligeti was good music, that what he was doing mattered, that it was really interesting. And it's endured. It seems to have endured. People are still talking about this music with positivity and with admiration and respect, and it deserves it. So there you go. Get your Ligeti right here. Step up, folks. It's in a little 4-CD Deutsche Grammophon box. What could be better? Keep on listening, friends. Take care.